who happens to know they poisoned people and lied about it.
Signs and symptoms of poisoning. Content warning: this film contains graphic details of poisons and their effects on health. It also contains some strong language. Based on a true story, viewer discretion is advised. We dedicate this educational video to all poisoning survivors, particularly the helpless and voiceless. Our inspiration stemmed from the traumatic injuries, systemic failures, and injustices I suffered as a poisoning victim, which motivated us to assist potential victims and their families in quickly resolving these issues. Family members also convinced me that this video will highlight and deter such evil crimes while creating a vehicle for real change. By systemic failures and injustices, we mean British healthcare and justice system failures as well as systemic racial and economic injustices that I experienced. For example, at the onset of the poison attack, a doctor referred me to a colorectal surgeon to treat my sudden rectal hemorrhage, and approximately 2 months later the same doctor referred me to a urologist to treat my mysteriously high urinary frequency and spontaneous urge incontinence. However, that same doctor was oblivious to the fact that just 4 months earlier I had started what was to be the first of countless dental treatments following mysterious toothaches and extensive teeth erosion. The reason is that in Britain, dental treatments are completely separate from medical treatments. Had the doctor been aware of my dental situation, there was a greater likelihood that he would have established a connection and addressed the underlying cause, beginning with toxicology tests, followed by antidotes, and similar measures. Instead he struggled to treat a confusing litany of symptoms. More importantly, awareness should have triggered a manhunt for the poisoner or laid a trap in our office kitchenette to catch him in the act. None of these happened for a number of reasons, which you'll learn by the end of this episode. Therefore, it was my responsibility as the patient to inform the doctors, a task that proved challenging due to my advanced illness and lack of experience in healthcare. It is certain that I would have died without family support. Words cannot express my ordeal thus far. They ruined my life and delivered neither justice nor closure. Due to systemic failures and injustices, the perpetrator continues to offend, and I am unable to access the necessary treatments. However, my relatives believe that God has spared my life for a purpose. Consequently, in the absence of justice, we believe that raising public awareness of these hidden threats, combined with our acquired knowledge, will help prevent further tragedies.
She's dead. Poisoned.
To understand the origin of evil, we must first go back to the beginning. So, before diving in, let's take a trip down memory lane with a crash course in history to see where it all began. Poison is described as follows by Merriam-Webster. 1. A substance that through its chemical action usually kills, injures, or impairs an organism. 2. A substance that inhibits the activity of another substance or the course of a reaction or process. As it happens, the history of poisonings in Britain is quite interesting. That much is obvious by listening to voices in newspaper articles from centuries ago. By the 19th century, the British Parliament had passed at least 5 poison-focused Acts of Parliament. These included the Poisoned Grain Act of 1863, the Poisoned Flesh Act of 1864, the Arsenic Act of 1851, the Pharmacy Act of 1868, and the Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875. These laws, coupled with the following newspaper reports of fatal poisonings, confirmed rumors that Britain was the poisoning capital of the world. Tragically, the government failed to stop the poisoning epidemic by actually enforcing these laws. Unfortunately, we are unable to reproduce complete articles due to time constraints. Here instead are excerpts from a few published pieces.
The Derby Mercury released an article on Wednesday, March 20, 1850, with the title The Case of Poisoning at Swinscoe. The poisoner was Chadwick and his fatal victim was Samuel Tunnicliffe. Snippets. The whole affair wears a very dark aspect and appears to have been premeditated for some months, and there is every reason to believe that the unfortunate man has been the victim of a gradual and most infamous course of poisoning, as he was frequently taken unwell after his meals. The Daily News released an article on Monday, December 7, 1863, with the title Poisoning in Leicestershire. The poisoner was Mr. Hutchins, and his fatal victim was his wife, Mrs. Emma Hutchins. Snippets. On Friday an inquest was held at the Horseshoe Inn on the body before Mr. Olasco, coroner. Sarah Hornbuckle deposed, I was called upon Thursday morning at 4 o'clock to see Mrs. Hutchins and found her sitting on a sofa in the top room. She complained of being very bad and said, I have taken something which I thought was magnesia and it tasted like copperas. I said, whatever did you take it for? She replied, he, meaning her husband, stood over me and made me take it. Before I did so he told me it was magnesia, and after I had taken it he said it was arsenic. I then sent for Mr. J. H. Morgan, the surgeon. He arrived about 5 o'clock. With the exception of a few minutes I remained with the deceased until she died. Her death took place about 10 o'clock on Thursday morning. Lloyd's Weekly London newspaper released an article on March 31, 1850, with the title Murder by Means of Arsenic. The poisoners were Maria Reeder and Elias Lucas. In a chilling twist, their fatal victim, Susan Lucas, was not only the wife of Elias Lucas but also the sister of Maria Reeder. Snippets: at the Cambridge Assizes, on Monday before Mr. Justice Whiteman, Elias Lucas aged 24 and Maria Reeder aged 20 were indicted for the willful murder of Susan Lucas by administering to her 2 drachmas of arsenic on the 21st of February last. Alfred Swain Taylor, I am the professor of chemistry and medical jurisprudence at Guy's Hospital. On the February 25 I received the stomach and earth. As the result of my examination I am prepared to say that death was produced by arsenic administered to the deceased in large quantities. The Daily News newspaper published the sale of poisons on Saturday, August 19, 1876. The article indicates that all those wonderful poison-focused laws were barely enforced. Snippets: I find from the Daily News that Sir W. Fraser has given notice in the House of Commons, that he would early in the next session move for leave to bring in a bill to amend the law relating to the sale of poisons. Surely poisons are well provided for by Acts of Parliament and require no further legislating except the one great want of all permissive acts, the provision for putting them in force. At present the above acts are a dead letter. Nearly every village grocer sells poisons without let or hindrance, and hence, whilst the regular chemist keeps a register of sales, the village dealer has no such register and consequently has a larger sale. The Sale of Food and Drugs Act is also another instance of the worthlessness of permissive legislation, the act being in full force in one county and ignored in another.
The Morning Chronicle released an article on Wednesday, January 9, 1850, with the title Condition of the Ballast Heavers. The poisoners were British ballast contractors, also referred to as longshore publicans. Their fatal victims were black workmen, predominantly African American laborers fleeing a witch hunt following the enactment of the Fugitive Slave Law in America. They were known as ballast heavers of the Port of London 200 years ago, and should not be confused with the so-called ballast getters. Still surprised? You won't be surprised when you discover that labor-intensive ballast heaving existed before the invention of complex hydraulic machines. However, it should be noted that some of so-called coal whippers were also black. Unfortunately, the subject will pose significant digression at this time due to the significant documentary evidence, but for the sake of clarity, here is a brief summary. In Britain, a publican is the licensee of a public house or tavern. The duty of the ballast heaver is to heave into the holds of a ship the ballast brought alongside the vessel by the Trinity lighters from the dredging engines. When a ship is so-called cranky built and loses stability after discharging a portion of its cargo, it typically needs stiffening ballast. We say the ballast stiffens a cranky vessel by making her firm or stable in the water. When a ship owner or captain required ballast to sail, the custom at that time was to apply to the ballast office, which had contracts with publicans. In turn, each publican employed a team of ballast heavers to perform the job. Therefore, the ship owner paid the publican, and in turn, the publican paid the ballast heavers. Each vessel requires about 80 tons on average, and payment is based on tonnage. By the way, you may have noticed English has evolved significantly over time. For example, back then writers would use the word gang instead of team. Sadly, the publicans ruthlessly exploited the ballast heavers, treating them like slaves. First, to retain their jobs, they were required to come to the public house in the morning and purchase a drink while waiting for work. Secondly, they were required to purchase another drink, carry it to the ship, and refill it after completing their daily tasks. Thirdly, they were expected to consume additional drinks and remain at the public house until bedtime to receive their daily wages. Any black ballast heaver who refused to comply and drink was left destitute without a job, some would say blacklisted. As a result, the publican deducted an enormous portion of the ballast heaver's income as payment in lieu of drinks. More importantly, the publicans routinely poisoned drinks given to black ballast heavers during the abolitionist movement. To the extent that anti-slavery activists used the words evil and extinct to describe the situation and plight of the black ballast heavers. For example, there were a number of failed attempts at the British Parliament to enact a bill to protect the ballast heavers, and the following is a snippet from one of the debates held at the British House of Commons on Tuesday, April 6, 1852. Mr. G. Thompson stated, in moving for leave to bring in a bill for establishing an office for the benefit of the ballast heavers of the Port of London, he was not asking the House to do anything novel or unprecedented. The case of the ballast heavers was almost identical with that of the coal whippers for whom the House had legislated on more than one occasion. The evils which he designed to remedy were very great. The ballast heavers, 400 in number, had at present no freedom of action. They could not obtain work unless they connected themselves with a particular public house, and after their work was over, they were obliged to spend a large portion of their earnings under the roof of the man who had the power to employ them or of keeping them destitute of employment. The following are snippets from the personal testimonies of the wives of black ballast heavers during a meeting held at the British and Foreign School in Shakespeare Walk, Shadwell. First ballast heaver's wife, quote,
"We have had very little money coming in of late. My husband has been very bad for 10 weeks back. He throws up blood. I suppose he has strained himself too much. All the money I have had for 6 weeks to keep us both has been 8s. If he was earning money, he would bring it to me.
Second ballast heaver's wife quote.
For 2 nights and last week my child and myself were obliged to go to bed breadless. We had nothing neither of those days. It was the same one night in the week before Christmas, though my husband received that same night 8s, but all was spent at the public house. On Christmas night we could not get any supper. We had no money and I took the gown off my back and pawned it for 2s to provide something for us to eat. I have nothing else to say but this, that whatever my husband earns I get little or nothing of it, for it goes to the public house where he gets his jobs.
Third ballast heaver's wife quote.
It is very little that my husband earns, and of what little he does earn he does not fetch much to me. He got one job last week, heaving 45 tons, and he fetched me home 160 for it. I was then in lodgings at 160 a week, but I could not afford them, and now we are in lodgings at 90. This week he has no work yet. In Christmas week my man told me he earned 25s, and I believe he did, but he only fetched home between 8s and 9s on Saturday. I had myself and child and husband to keep out of that. My husband works for a publican, and it was at his house he spent the money. One day last week this publican said to him, when he asked for a job, I cannot give you a job, for there is nothing against you upon the slate but 1s, and so he got none there. He works for another public house and he went there, but the publican would not give him a job unless he spent all he earned. My infant is 6 weeks old today.
The exact numbers of black victims killed by this large-scale employment poisoning scheme is unclear, but some have described it as genocide. Nonetheless, documentary evidence suggests that the scheme rendered otherwise thriving black communities in Britain nearly extinct, if you consider indirect results such as disease, mental illness, and abject poverty of impacted families. Taking into account that the latter often leads to crime, Britain shifted executions behind prison walls, ending their status as public events following the Capital Punishment Amendment Act of 1868. By the way, did you notice this legislation occurred 5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation and just 3 years after the American Civil War? Well, some believe this was not a coincidence, but revealing their theory would create unnecessary digression at this time.
Now let's revisit the Morning Chronicle article from Wednesday, January 9, 1850, titled Condition of the Ballast Heavers. This article also confirms the British government was well aware of the publicans' large-scale and organized employee poisoning scheme. Snippets. The correspondent of the Morning Chronicle in the manufacturing districts stated that in some parts of Staffordshire the working men were Tommied, meaning that all their wages were received and spent at the Tommy shop. Now the ballast heavers, though not Tommied altogether, were slowly poisoned, which was far worse than being Tommied. The stuff they were made to drink was nothing but slow poison. He referred to what they were forced to take at the publicans. It not only poisoned them slowly but drained their pockets effectually. It had further been proved in evidence before the Common Council and before the House of Commons that the drink sold to the coal whippers aboard was not beer but something literally poisonous, a collection of drugs and rubbish unfit for the human stomach.
An article titled Why Sugar Death Stalked Bradford was originally published in 1858 but reprinted by BBC History magazine in May 2024. The unwitting poisoner was John Neal, and the fatal victims were at least 21 people, including children. Snippets. On the 25th of October 1858, Bradford sweepmaker John Neal sent an employee on an errand to a chemist. Neal ordered the employee to buy 12 pounds of plaster of Paris nicknamed Daft, which he planned to use in his confectionery in place of expensive sugar to keep prices low. The chemist was ill and bedridden, so he instructed his apprentice to fetch the Daft from the storeroom to sell to Neal's employee. Unfortunately, there were 2 unlabeled casks of white powder placed near each other, and so the apprentice accidentally supplied Neal with 12 pounds of arsenic. The arsenic was used to make hundreds of sweets, resulting in the deaths of at least 21 people, including several children.
This tragic arsenic disaster transpired approximately 7 years following the enactment of the Arsenic Act of 1851 by the British Parliament, corroborating previous reports that suggested the lack of enforcement of these laws. Republishing the numerous newspaper reports of fatal poisoning cases in Britain would take forever, so time constraints prevent us from doing so. We believe these poison murders are sinister enough to establish distinct modus operandi, especially given that some people have attributed them to the epidemic of teenage cancers, disabilities, and mental illnesses in Britain. However, not all poisonings were fatal, and some cases do not make it to print for a variety of reasons. For example, the victim managed to survive a slow poisoning attack due to their youth and strength. While it's unclear whether so-called publicans pioneered the weaponization of drinks with dangerous substances, they certainly perfected the recipe for racial violence against the backdrop of the global anti-slavery movement. Sadly, these paved the way for racial violence in British workplaces today, with all sorts of weird code names such as spiked, laced, or pubbed. This typically occurs when an unsuspecting employee's coffee is accessed and poisoned by a coworker, often under the pretense of team-building activities such as team coffees. My journey began when a coworker repeatedly poisoned my coffee at the office.
And that's a poison, broadhead, which last I heard was illegal.
Welcome to my channel, where you get a first-hand account and answers to pertinent questions. We keep it real to ensure you remain safe and healthy. In this video I will walk you through 10 major signs and symptoms of repeated poisoned coffee ingestion. We'll highlight instances of burked along the way and you'll learn about this acronym at the end. First, I should point out that I do not have any formal medical training. My first-hand experiences and empirical evidence as a poisoning patient form the basis of all the provided information. Consequently, my healthcare records were also used to produce this video. Second, there appear to be symptomatic differences between victims of poisoned food and those of poisoned drinks, such as poisoned coffee. This video explores the latter. Third, I will use the term ongoing to help differentiate between those symptoms that are presently active versus symptoms that have abated. We labeled some symptoms as gradual for lack of a better term. These manifest any time from months to years after poison attack. Given the dynamic and evolving nature of these symptoms, I may offer updates in future episodes. Fourth, there's evidence suggesting that pre-existing condition may be exacerbated in a confusing manner during the initial stages of poisoning. Finally, no poison antidote has ever been administered to me. Logic dictates that different poisons may produce different symptoms than those we're about to explore. Given the scope and time constraints, it can be more straightforward to illustrate concepts using personal experiences. Without further delay, let's get started. Major poisoned coffee symptoms. Number 1. Extensive teeth erosion, toothaches, and teeth stains without gum disease. This is at the top of my list because it has proven to be the costliest poison symptom to date, in light of the high expense of dental care in Britain and my unemployment after my illnesses. Some of my teeth X-rays shown above were taken at the onset following excruciating toothaches a few days after consuming poisoned coffee. Since then, I've been referred to 3 specialized dental hospitals and more than 8 dental clinics for treatment. Consequently, this symptom is basically immediate and ongoing. About 5 years after consuming poisoned coffee, I had my first root filling, and in the years that followed, I had several root canal treatments and teeth extraction. My teeth had to be extracted because of the severe erosion that made them unfillable and induced decay. As a result, numerous dental treatments were performed, including cavity fillings, tooth extractions, crowns and root canal treatments. Most dentists were baffled by my lack of gum disease despite the fact that my teeth were extensively eroded and stained. Ladies and gents, the lack of gum disease is crucial here. My gums were so healthy that my previous dentist had to struggle with an eroded back tooth during extraction. The most straightforward explanation we've heard thus far is that my teeth did not heal from the poisoning attack, but my gums did. Albeit with intermittent abscess, pain, and some discoloration. This explains why one of my previous dentists was worried about several of my teeth that quote crumbled following filling procedures. During a visit the same dentist asked me, bewildered,
"How many cigarettes do you smoke daily?"
"I'm not a smoker and have never been," I said. I would also like to add with pride that I do not use illegal substances. They discovered that my teeth staining was caused by consuming a mixture of coffee and extremely toxic poison. For example, the stain on the back teeth in the photo resembles iron rust or coffee color. This particular tooth was being prepared for fillings. Since I couldn't get rid of these stains with just my electric or manual toothbrush, my dentists have employed a variety of specialized gear over the years. As a result of my severe injuries and the challenge of obtaining medical care in Britain, my anxious relatives organized and funded my trip abroad for a series of tests and examinations. I met a seasoned dentist who spoke in a concerned tone, using phrases like abscessed teeth, sinus discharge, and occlusal decay. Then he went on to explain that it was no longer enough to just brush my teeth like I used to. The dentist recommended that I properly floss my teeth after every meal. My teeth should then be brushed before being rinsed with salty water. After the inspection, the dentist discreetly told my relative that I was facing serious dental problems for the rest of my life due to repeated poisoned coffee ingestion. They also advised a bone marrow biopsy should provide further evidence of the toxicity. It's interesting to note that the dentist says I still don't have gum disease in spite of these issues.
You thinking it's poison? Oh, wonderful. Very moody. You thinking it's poison, Somerset?
Major poisoned coffee symptoms. Number 2. Teeth grinding and teeth clenching through day and night. Apparently, a scientific explanation for the symptom involves advanced knowledge of neuroscience, which we felt was beyond the scope of this video. The good news is that the symptom is short-term and occurs when the body is exposed to poison toxins. Therefore, it is somewhat immediate and appears to gradually cease once the toxin's concentration level drops. The bad news is that the damage done to my teeth is permanent. At the time, my dentist advised that a polymer teeth guard similar to that worn by boxers would help remedy the problem. However, She abandoned the idea due to her concern that I might choke during sleep. It was suggested that individuals genetically susceptible to epileptic seizures typically experience a lethal attack at this point. Subsequently, I also suffered severe sensitivity to hot and cold meals. Given the constellation of symptoms, my dentist referred me to the Department of Oral Medicine at Guy's Hospital in London. On clinic day, after a visual examination of my mouth and throat, the consultant verbally confirmed that I was poisoned. In most countries, a doctor will report the crime to the police at this point. Clearly, this is not the case in Britain because he failed to alert the police. Importantly, he did not schedule or provide any treatment, instead suggesting that it was entirely my fault. As a result, I was not able to access free specialist dental treatment through the NHS. In essence, I was forced to seek expensive private specialist dental treatment. For example, just a few days ago, one of my crowns fell off during a meal, which was a potentially dangerous incident. The photo above depicts the crown's cavity revealing the partial tooth underneath, followed by a photo of the aforesaid crown. To appreciate the prohibitive dental costs, let's analyze my treatment options for this single tooth, as advised by the dentist. First, I had a complex extraction of the remaining partial tooth at a cost of £422. Then I had to choose between a bridge unit at a cost of £2,802.60 or an implant at a cost of £4,298.20. Remember, just 6 years ago, a root canal treatment resulted in the installation of the same crown at a combined cost of £1,650, without inflation adjustment. Finally, multiply these figures by 32 teeth, keeping in mind that we include extracted teeth in this calculation due to their prior treatments. Sadly, my dental insurance provider wrote to me in December 2024 to advise that my insurance will be terminated at the end of my current policy year because I claimed back more than my policy allowed. By the way, NHS is an abbreviation for National Health Service, which is responsible for public health care in Britain. After my examination at Guy's Hospital, the consultant's post-clinic letter stated,
Diagnosis: frictional keratosis, buccal mucosae, particularly related to angulation of upper wisdom teeth. Management: discharged with reassurance.
Clearly, he must have experienced a severe case of amnesia after my examination, as the word poison did not appear in his written diagnosis, which contradicted his earlier verbal diagnosis. The book Black and British, A Forgotten History eloquently highlighted this type of selective amnesia. Therefore, this is an instance of Burkt, as all details can be independently verified.
Remember, he is the father of lies. He will seek to poison your mind. You will need this against him.
Major poisoned coffee symptoms, number 3. Throat burns and intermittent inflammation of uvula and tonsils. Since my poisoning, the frequency and severity of my sore throats have increased over time. Nowadays, it typically results in frequent upper respiratory tract infections that require a course of antibiotics such as cephalexin. On the other hand, my uvula inflammation has been very severe but less frequent thus far. The last episode necessitated a combination of medications, including stronger antibiotics and steroids, as I was extremely sick and my voice was barely audible. Therefore, this is a gradual and ongoing symptom. Remember, my dental situation mirrors these circumstances. For example, in July 2024 my general practitioner prescribed a course of amoxicillin antibiotics to treat my chest infection. Less than 4 months later, in November 2024, my dentist prescribed a course of phenoxymetyl penicillin antibiotics to treat my severe toothaches and dental infection. In December 2024, my general practitioner prescribed doxycycline antibiotics to treat a chest infection. Oh, I nearly forgot to mention, I was prescribed clarithromycin antibiotics in April 2025 for yet another chest infection. This time, I was also given a simultaneous course of prednisolone tablets. These were the primary motivations behind my decision to use voice synthesis technology in this video. During my family-sponsored examinations overseas, a specialist doctor tried to explain the situation in layman's terms, and here's a paraphrase.
The poisoned coffee inflicted a similar injury in your throat as it did on your teeth. The problem lies in the fact that a wound within the throat is more difficult to heal than a wound on the skin, leading to the onset of these symptoms.
The doctor also suggested a surgical procedure as a backup plan in case my uvula inflammation worsens. A while ago, my friends engaged in a heated debate over the highly toxic substances the poisoner had used in response to my symptoms. One felt some of my symptoms were consistent with a toxic mixture of pesticides and pollutants administered in small doses via coffee. However, he went on to explain his choice was merely due to the fact that I survived the attack. Otherwise he would have chosen so-called white arsenic. My other friend suggested a mixture of lead battery acid and pollutants. In the end, they agreed on one point: whatever highly toxic compound the poisoner used had a strong acidic property. By pollutants, we refer to an article published in the Morning Chronicle on January 9, 1850 titled Condition of the Ballast Heavers, which states,
"Now the ballast heavers, though not tommied altogether, were slowly poisoned, which was far worse than being tommied. The stuff they were made to drink was nothing but slow poison." He referred to what they were forced to take at the publicans. It not only poisoned them slowly but drained their pockets effectually. It had further been proved in evidence before the Common Council and before the House of Commons that the drink sold to the coal whippers aboard was not beer but something literally poisonous, a collection of drugs and rubbish unfit for the human stomach.
For example, a mixture of filtered sewage and battery acid, which contains sulfuric acid, apparently becomes odorless, enabling concealment in coffee. Similarly, so-called white arsenic, which is present in some pesticides, is apparently odorless, soluble in water, and largely tasteless.
The water was filth. It was poisoned. It was sour.
Major poisoned coffee symptoms, number 4. Cervical spine degeneration causing intermittent but severe arm and neck pain. For clarity, I divided this section into 2 parts, namely official and unofficial. Official. Some years after repeated poisoned coffee ingestion, I suffered excruciating left arm, shoulder, and neck pain, which prompted a magnetic resonance imaging scan. An MRI scan of my cervical spine revealed a diagnosis of multi-level cervical disc degeneration C3-4, C4-5, C5-6, C6-7, and borderline canal stenosis. By the way, this diagnosis is merely a short version of the radiologist's findings. The pain lasted a few weeks at the time, but frequency and duration of episodes have since increased. Recently it has morphed into a weird kind of pins and needles in my left arm. A practitioner suggested that this particular symptom, coupled with some of the others, is consistent with poisoning from a substance containing hexavalent chromium. My relatives are also worried because the orthopedic spine doctor failed to prescribe any medication or treatment plan except strong prescription painkillers such as cocodamol tablets. My relatives have heard of horror stories where treatable patients that look like me were sent home to die, eerily similar to the Tuskegee experiments. At present it's unclear whether this is a Burke because it's unclear whether the orthopedic doctor deliberately withheld my treatment or whether any treatment exists for this particular diagnosis. Unofficial. This is a tricky one because some argued it's not an obvious candidate for poisoning symptoms, but I've added it for 2 reasons. First, my siblings and parents do not have any such spine or bone problems. Second, according to an overseas-based doctor familiar with my ordeal, the cervical disc degeneration occurred in my neck, which is along the poison path. Consequently, he believes that the poison damaged some nerves that service my cervical discs, leading to disc degeneration over a few years. I have not received an explanation for the shiny mark on the above MRI scan. A while ago, I was reading about the symptoms of whiplash victims, and I immediately experienced a sense of déjà vu. On a bad day, I can barely lift my arm above shoulder level, and daily routine tasks become debilitating. Last time it was almost impossible to turn my head to the left. There are moments when I feel as though my spine is on the verge of breaking, a far cry from when I was capable of lifting almost anything. This is a gradual and ongoing symptom since diagnosis was made a few years after repeated poison attacks.
I want you to think real hard about what your spine is worth, Mr. Walker.
Major poisoned coffee symptoms, number 5. Rectal hemorrhage and intermittent abdominal pain. I suffered rectal hemorrhage and diarrhea for weeks after consuming poisoned coffee, with the severity of the symptoms decreasing over time. Initially, blood was heavy enough to drip into my toilet bowl. Eventually, the situation subsided, resulting in intermittent rectal bleeding, blood-stained toilet paper, and soreness. A temporary period of mysterious prostate issues followed, which a sexual health clinic treated. The doctor initially referred me to an ST clinic, but was puzzled when my results returned all clear, as I do not have any family history of bowel disorders. Subsequently, he referred me to a colorectal surgeon. My abdominal pain has persisted, though intermittently, especially in the mornings before breakfast. Consequently, I had an abdominal ultrasound recently, and here are some of the images. Therefore, rectal hemorrhage is an immediate symptom, starting within days of poisoned coffee ingestion. However, my abdominal pain was gradual and ongoing, occurring years after the poison attacks. That said, according to whistleblower, the poisoning of my coffee occurred more than once, potentially altering the duration and severity of the symptom.
Vanishing cloud of poison gas.
Major poisoned coffee symptoms, number 6. Swollen tender pelvic lymph nodes and urinary urge incontinence through day and night. The first time I saw a doctor about this symptom, he appeared preoccupied. In retrospect, I believe he was struggling to understand why a patient, who was young enough to be his son and had no prior medical history, suddenly presented with geriatric symptoms. The onset of the symptom and the rectal hemorrhage coincided within a matter of weeks. My doctor did urinalysis and dipstick analyses, all tests returned negative and clear, so he gave me bladder control diary charts. However, During my subsequent visit, he witnessed my spontaneous urinary urge and leakage, so he quickly referred me to a urologist. This was probably the quickest referral I have ever received, thanks to the tragicomedy involved. Following an investigation at St. Mary's Hospital, Preed Street, London, the urologist diagnosed, quote,
Lower urinary tract symptoms, predominantly storage and shoddy lymphadenopathy, including the groin.
Surprisingly, the urologist admitted in the final paragraph of his letter that he did not fully understand my symptoms. About 6 months after this diagnosis, I started noticing tiny bits in my underwear. On closer examination, they turned out to be small pieces of dead skin from my scrotum. These are still present, albeit with some abatement over time, and a family member is concerned about the potential impact on my reproductive system and DNA. Eventually, my general practitioner prescribed a medication known as tamsulosin hydrochloride. However, I was unable to take it for extended periods due to severe side effects. Over time, the swelling in my pelvic lymph nodes decreased, but the frequency and intensity of spontaneous urination urge remained elevated. As a result, I need to take a detour on most journeys to enable me to urinate. Frustratingly, some detours resulted in penalty charges when I parked in congested areas with restricted parking spaces, typically in London. When I traveled with public transport and a toilet was not available in the bus or train, a detour simply resulted in additional travel costs. That said, I discovered that when I get a few days of sun exposure, my condition seems to improve. For instance, my condition tends to improve when I visit my extended family members who reside in tropical regions. Presently we do not have a scientific explanation for this phenomenon. However, a sibling suggested that the poison compromised my body's ability to metabolize vitamin D, leading to a greater reliance on the sun.
The poison I have infected her with will fester, causing exquisite pain, till it reaches her heart.
Major poisoned coffee symptoms, number 7. Dry, cracked heels and painful feet, plantar fasciitis or necrotizing fasciitis or nerve damage. Above is a photo of my socks, showing dry skin residue from my cracked heels. Above is a photo of my dry, cracked heels. I have tried several treatments, the most recent being Flexitol heel balm, but all have been exercises in futility. The pain in both my feet started soon after the urologist's diagnosis, and as a result, walking or standing for extended periods can be a challenge. Initially it was limited to about the first hour after I got out of bed. Over time it got worse, so I switched to wearing soft, comfortable shoes whenever the dress code permits. A relative is worried that the poison might lead to the amputation of my legs. My physiotherapist has diagnosed me with plantar fasciitis, but I believe he misdiagnosed me for the following reasons. First, inflammation of the plantar fascia beneath the heel causes plantar fasciitis, and stretching the sole of the foot apparently causes the pain. However, my foot pain does not conform with these descriptions. Furthermore, the pain has been progressively worsening, and none of his exercise programs appear to be helping. Second, he appeared confused when he learned that my diabetes test result was negative and clear. Third, a recent case at Newcastle Crown Court revealed that the poisoning victim suffered necrotizing fasciitis, not plantar fasciitis. Ultimately, the X-ray of my feet, as depicted above, appears to be normal, indicating that my foot bones remain unbroken and my mobility remains unimpaired. Nonetheless, sometimes I get a sensation similar to what you get when a small insect perches on your leg, but the trouble is I do not see any insect on my leg. Consequently, an overseas-based doctor who is familiar with my ordeal believes that I have either nerve damage or a form of necrotizing fasciitis, but not plantar fasciitis. Given my lack of a family history of plantar fasciitis, we're eager to learn from those who disagree and provide their reasoning. This is a gradual and ongoing symptom.
Enjoyed your meal, boys?
Major poisoned coffee symptoms, number 8. Distinctive vocalization. Several eyewitnesses, including the whistleblower, can testify that I suddenly fell seriously ill in the office and uttered vocal sounds soon after drinking coffee delivered by my coworker. My police report identified a few of these eyewitnesses, but the police did not interview any of them. It's difficult to accurately describe the vocal sounds, but we feel it's a strange combination of a grunt and a shout of pain identical to the ubiquitous clip of the late Alexei Navalny soon after he was poisoned.
This is Alexei Navalny, a prominent Russian opposition figure and Kremlin critic, lying on a stretcher at the Omsk airport, some time after he was poisoned. After an emergency landing, passengers could hear Navalny wailing in pain. He eventually lost consciousness and has been in a medically induced coma ever since. Navalny is the latest addition to a long list of Kremlin critics to face suspected or confirmed poisoning. Berlin's Charité Hospital released a statement stating, "Clinical findings indicate poisoning with a substance from the group of cholinesterase inhibitors, which impacts the nervous system."
Therefore, this is essentially an immediate symptom, as it typically occurs less than 3 hours after poison ingestion, depending on mode of ingestion. For instance, a victim may utter a distinctive sound immediately if poison is administered intravenously, while vocalization may take up to 3 hours if it is administered orally. Depending on exposure duration and toxicity of the poison, the victim's personality will eventually change, bearing similarities to drugs or alcohol influence. Consequently, it's crucial because it pretty much identifies the location where the victim was poisoned. As such, it should be an important symptom from a law enforcement and justice perspective. Sadly, British authorities selectively apply justice based on the victim's race or color, despite the hypocritical rhetoric on television. For instance, documents from a recent case at Newcastle Crown Court reveal that the poisoning victim vocalized pain during the attack. However, unlike me, this victim received swift justice, free healthcare, and financial compensation due to his white ethnicity. Ultimately, his poisoner was sentenced to 31 years in prison because the victim was white. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why this is a classic example of double standards. It turns out there are significant research gaps in this particular branch of medical science. Nonetheless, our inquiries indicate there is a connection between the volume and toxicity of poison ingested by a victim and the threshold at which vocalization is triggered. We do not know the blood toxicity threshold value at which this vocal reaction occurs. However, we received a plausible explanation that poison effectively inhibits an enzyme required for cellular respiration in mitochondria. When a certain amount of highly toxic poison is ingested by a victim, the brain cells apparently become unable to perform basic cellular respiration, which causes stress and shock, triggering vocal sounds. This is essentially a form of temporary but severe cellular hypoxia in the brain. This theory also appears to explain my subsequent temporary symptoms, such as stutter and slurred speech, which we'll explore in the next episode, if I'm still here. We would like to hear from anyone who disagrees with this theory and why. Recently, a friend joked that the poison temporarily fried my brain cells. Therefore, next time your neighbor makes such a sound, please do not ignore them, you'll likely save a life while sharpening your innate detective skills. Importantly, remember to collect a sample of whatever they were drinking or eating. If you are able to identify the person who prepared their food or drink, you've likely identified the perpetrator.
Well, sir, it's one of the deadliest poisons there is. It takes only one little drop to kill a man.
Major poisoned coffee symptoms, number 9. Chronic fatigue and unusual tiredness. In hindsight, based on incidents, this symptom got my attention months after poisoning attacks. I started struggling a few minutes into my 2-hour group boxing workout, which I used to attend about twice monthly at 576 Harrow Road, London. By the end of the subsequent session, my gym coach had an uncomfortable conversation with me. Unfortunately, I was unaware at the time that a coworker had repeatedly poisoned my coffee. Consequently, I participated in a routine 6-a-side soccer match some days later. My team lost due to my glaringly pathetic performance on the pitch, and a close friend refused to talk to me for days. Subsequently, I resigned from playing soccer and gave up boxing shortly thereafter. By the way, this is not the so-called long COVID because it occurred years prior to the COVID pandemic. This particular symptom has since resulted in my dismissal from a number of low-income jobs. For example, the following are snippets from 2 such redacted dismissal letters.
I am writing to confirm that during your probation period you have not been successful in achieving the required standards. Therefore, your employment has been terminated with immediate effect. In accordance with your terms and conditions, you will be paid 1 week in lieu of notice and any holiday accrued.
The second letter read, quote,
I am writing to confirm that your employment with the company is terminated with immediate effect on date due to you being unable to fulfill the requirement of the role. You are entitled to 1 day's notice, but as explained to you, you are not required to work this and will be paid in lieu. You are also entitled to 1.5 days holiday pay.
By contrast, I was never dismissed from any job prior to poisoning. I always tendered my resignation notice. Nowadays, I try jogging to get some fresh air but end up walking after just a few meters. Frequently, I'm unable to wake up early in the mornings like I used to. Sometimes I fall asleep in the afternoon, which was virtually impossible previously. It turned out a number of my co-workers also witnessed the symptom in the 3rd year of my employment. The positive news is that I was free of diabetes following a recent test, and I do not have any family history of diabetes. This is an ongoing symptom.
007. Bond's been poisoned. He's going into cardiac arrest.
Major poisoned coffee symptoms, number 10. Last but not least, new and mysterious blood disorder. Investigating my chronic fatigue and unusual tiredness led to the discovery of this complex condition. It turned out to be connected with some of the other symptoms, such as renal system issues and frequent upper respiratory tract infections. The general practitioner appeared to be puzzled by my blood test results, prompting several tests. Eventually she said to me,
"I'll refer you to hematologists so they can advise on the cause of your blood abnormalities, as I cannot explain it."
The hematologist did not show up for my scheduled NHS appointment on December 16, 2024 despite a 6-month wait, and they failed to provide an explanation. Therefore, this appears to be a BERCT. Apparently most of my blood components are now abnormally low. For example, in my recent blood test result, the following were significantly below the reference range: decreased white blood cells, decreased platelets, decreased neutrophils, decreased hemoglobin concentration, decreased mean cell volume and decreased mean cell hemoglobin. A friend offered an unscientific but plausible explanation for this new blood abnormality. He pointed out that most of these decreased blood components, such as white blood cells, play important roles in the functioning of my immune system. Therefore, he believed that when I drank the poisoned coffee, these blood components gathered at the sites of infection to combat the disease. Consequently, the rest of my body experienced a reduction in their number. By the way, if you wish to donate, please scan the QR code displayed, or visit the website www.donorbox.org/endhatepa. Your support brings me closer to healing and restoring my quality of life. Thanks for your generosity. We recently sought a second opinion from a different doctor. During the consultation, he stared at my blood test results. After what felt like an eternity of silence, he turned and asked arguably the best question yet. "Do you have an infection?" Obviously he was unaware of the underlying issues at the time. Consequently, my relatives are worried the poisoner infected me with any number of insidious waterborne diseases. On a positive note, we've noticed that certain hospitals have now initiated same-day blood test services, which were unavailable during my poisoning. This is gradual and ongoing because it manifested a few years after poisoning attacks.
And if any mutants stand in our way, we will use this poison against them.
I have received numerous questions from horrified individuals regarding the location and cause of my injuries. Hopefully, the following will answer such questions. I suffered repeated coffee poisoning while I worked for DST International Ltd, based in Surrey, Britain. DST International Ltd was subsequently renamed DST Global Solutions Ltd. At the time my employer was a subsidiary of DST Systems Inc., headquartered in Kansas City, USA. SS&C Technologies Holdings Inc., headquartered in Windsor, USA, subsequently acquired DST Systems Inc. Both my employment records at DST Global Solutions Ltd and the Human Resources Manager can confirm that I had over 107 days of work absence due to 23 episodes of illnesses in a 3.5-year employment period. By the middle of my employment period, I was urinating more than 13 times in a 24-hour period, which sometimes led to urinary tract infections. Simultaneously, I suffered numerous mysterious illnesses such as rectal hemorrhage and serious dental problems. I frequently got sudden, uncontrollable urges to urinate, which resulted in urinary leakage. It turned out these were proportional to the toxicity and acidity of the poison that I ingested in a given period. My health deteriorated and I became extremely ill, resembling a walking zombie. These circumstances, along with the fact that I was living alone at the time, led to a desperate crisis. Working from home was not as popular and ubiquitous as it is today. I was no longer able to wake up early enough to arrive at work on time. I started to wet myself on the commute to work and consequently adding tissue papers to my underwear. It turned out that during my frequent toilet trips at the office, some of my co-workers witnessed tissue paper fall to the floor through my underwear and trousers. Fortunately, multiple teams shared DST's open plan office space, and my co-workers recalled witnessing the poisoner eagerly prepare so-called team coffee in the adjacent kitchenette every morning. Afterwards, he puts the 3 cups of coffee on a small tray and makes his way back, leaving a cup on my desk and the other team member's desk. Subsequently, our third team member began to mysteriously carry his own drink bottle to work, resulting in the poisoner preparing only 2 daily cups of coffee instead of the usual 3. Eventually, a reliable source revealed the poisoner's secrets, leading one eyewitness to become a whistleblower. It turned out the poisoner carried a small pocket-sized bottle filled with highly carcinogenic toxins every morning he came into work. The psychopath then used this small pocket-sized bottle to poison my coffee in small doses every morning, taking advantage of the natural concealment that coffee's color provides. On one occasion, the poisoned coffee caused me to fall seriously ill in the office, and several co-workers witnessed my vocalization symptoms. On a different occasion I fell so ill it felt like my heart was going to explode. Apparently, I could have suffered a fatal cardiac arrest at that point if I had been older and genetically predisposed. On that particular occasion, a co-worker from a different team found me crouched over with red eyes, sitting at the top of the rear staircase in our office. However, you'll soon learn that the British police refused to interview any eyewitnesses, including this one. It appears that the human resources manager recorded these serious health incidents in the office and my significant sickness absence in a secret online database, which British employers use to share information about potential hires. We've used the word secret to distinguish this database from normal pre-employment screening tools such as criminal convictions database. Consequently, I was essentially blacklisted and have not been able to secure permanent employment in an identical role or my trained profession ever since. The whistleblower also revealed that the poisoner was my former team co-worker, who happens to be a white man over 20 years older than myself. The so-called team coffee turned out to be a ruse to access and tamper with my coffee. Surprisingly, some co-workers were aware of the scheme but chose to remain silent. Based on conversations with co-workers, he is, quote,
a bigoted pedophile
who told a co-worker that I will be medically retired. On a different occasion, he angrily declared that he would, quote,
wipe that smile off the N-word face,
in reference to my office mugshot on which I had a bright smile. My former co-workers can also confirm I had a, quote, brilliant smile, at the start of my employment at DST Global Solutions Ltd. Did you notice any similarities with the treatment of black ballast heavers in the Port of London some 200 years ago?
Solomon, $43 all to you.
That is far more than my wages amount to.
It's been the most profitable week.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Now some of you may find the following funny because the whistleblower did. My employer scheduled a professional examination for me in the second year of my employment. The poisoner informed a colleague that I would fail the exam due to an increase in the poison's toxicity in my coffee some days prior. Consequently, I had another episode of mysterious severe illness and could not attend the examination. However, my doctor provided a letter for our human resources manager following my recovery. This allowed for a rescheduling of my examination, which I successfully passed, but the poisoner was taken aback by the news. The whistleblower claims that during my third year of employment at DST, the poisoner began exerting undue pressure on our human resources manager to expedite my dismissal. For instance, the poisoner arranged and chaired so-called sickness absence meetings with the human resources manager and myself following episode of illness. As a result, he dispatched multiple emails to us. Below are excerpts and snippets from 3 of those redacted correspondences. On March 12, the poisoner sent us an email, quote,
the seriousness of the situation was stressed to you. Also that the level of sick absence was extremely high and unacceptable. If the situation does not improve, consideration may have to be given to invoking the disciplinary procedures.
On April 1, the poisoner sent us an email, quote,
given the recent sickness absences on top of your sick absence history, this process will be escalated to the next stage. The next stage is to determine if disciplinary action is required. Action. Human Resource Manager. We agreed that you were to phone the GP surgery when I was around so that the time and date could be confirmed as suitable. From the work point of view. Action. Myself.
On April 16, the poisoner sent us an email, quote,
I need to set up a meeting with you as the next stage in the process of managing your high level of sick leave. I would like to have this meeting by 23rd April. We would need to determine if disciplinary action is required.
Observe how the poisoner aggressively advocated for disciplinary action in all his emails. Eventually, our human resources manager arranged a health assessment by a Dr. P at Tower Hill Medical Center, located on Lloyds Avenue, London. Afterwards, Dr. P wrote and confirmed my illness was genuine. The second paragraph of letter states,
I believe up to 2.5 week episodes were probably attributable to this condition worsening. There was another significant period of absence for a different condition, which should not necessarily recur.
However, despite Dr. P's positive assessment, I lost my job a few weeks later. Since then, my employment has been intermittent at best, and I'm presently unemployed. Subsequently, these led to the accumulation of multiple debts, foreclosure of my mortgage due to repayment arrears and subsequent homelessness. Willesden County Court in London issued my eviction notice at the request of my mortgage provider, Leeds Building Society. Since then, I have remained trapped in a vicious cycle of homelessness and temporary accommodation. Recently, Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council inexplicably removed me from their housing needs register to exacerbate the problem. The whistleblower also revealed that our human resources manager received a private and confidential document that indicated the poisoner and his accomplice illegally accessed my personal email account. It turned out the poisoner got my home IP address from a Cisco firewall device, which he administered at DST Global Solutions Ltd. At the time, Cisco firewall devices captured the IP address of any employee whenever they worked remotely. The poisoner and his accomplice then used my home IP address to hack my personal computer at home.
Whoa, 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 whoa! What the hell you think you're doing, boy? Get that nigger out of here.
Now let's explore official responses from British authorities. I filled out a police report detailing incidents, and the British Metropolitan Police Service issued me reference number 04041665/23. However, a few months later I received an email from a police officer advising that my case was closed. Here is a verbatim copy of his email, including grammatical errors, quote,
"This is to let you know that your case is now closed, as the police have investigated and followed up with the hospital whose details you provided. We could not find any evidence of poisoning from these records. Due to this, your case has now been closed."
Therefore, the British Metropolitan Police Service closed my case 5 months after I spoke to a case officer, without providing any redress despite the following facts. A. They refused to conduct a dental or medical examination of my injuries. B. They failed to interview any of the witnesses who were identified as being present in the office when I fell severely ill, exhibiting symptoms such as vocalization, following my ingestion of toxic coffee. C. They declined to conduct an investigation and disclose my employee data, which was stored in a secret online database shared by British employers. Apparently I'm legally entitled to this data through the Subject Access Request legislation. D. The whistleblower identified the poisoner, but they failed to arrest or charge him. E. Based on inquiries at the clinics and hospitals where I received treatment, the Metropolitan Police Service merely accessed less than 20% of my dental and medical records. A decent lawyer expressed resignation and frustration, saying,
"I really want to help you achieve justice and closure, but without a green light from the police my hands are tied."
Baroness Casey's appointment to review standards and culture in the British Metropolitan Police Service followed the abduction, rape, and murder of Sarah Everard by Wayne Couzens, a serving police officer, in March 2021. Wikipedia reports that police arrested Couzens just 6 days after Everard's abduction. Juxtapose this with the initial police response following the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence. Therefore, the police performed their duty without any hindrance, swiftly dispensing justice because Everard was white, like the recent poison victim in Newcastle. Otherwise, a double standard would have arisen, similar to what was observed following the racist murder of Lawrence. Hence, there is a double standard in Britain, where white victims receive justice while everyone else receives injustice or apathy. In March 2023, Baroness Casey published her final report titled, An Independent Review into the Standards of Behavior and Internal Culture of the Metropolitan Police Service. Her report is in the public domain, and the following are insightful snippets. Page 7, paragraph 4, quote,
"Many of the issues raised by the review are far from new. I make a finding of institutional racism, sexism, and homophobia in the Metropolitan Police Service. Sir William Macpherson made the first of those findings in his inquiry into the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence as long ago as 1999. Many people have been raising grave concerns about the Metropolitan Police Service for much longer than that."
Page 332, paragraph 2, quote,
"However, in relation to racism, misogyny, and homophobia, we have seen and set out evidence in this review of 1. Overt acts of homophobia, misogyny, and racism by serving officers and staff in the Metropolitan Police Service. 2. Systems that have bias and are discriminatory in the outcomes they deliver. 3. Bias in the policing of London, including under-protection and over-policing of black communities and under-protection of women and girls. 4. A culture of denial with leadership and systemic failures to root out racist behaviors and address discrimination."
By the way, some remarks referred to the culture that enabled David Carrick, a white police officer and serial rapist, to commit sexual violence against numerous women before his suspension in 2021. It turns out the perpetrator and his accomplice knew they would be protected by the police because they are white, and their victim is black. Furthermore, when I'm online, British authorities routinely hack into my personal computer for surveillance and harassment. This has necessitated frequent Windows operating system reinstallation and security configuration by an expert. In a recent attack they installed a spyware titled Remote Desktop Connection because their less conspicuous surveillance tools were not able to penetrate my computer, which was secured by an expert. It appears they are so desperate to cover up these revelations that they have labeled me a terrorist. Therefore, these tactics are efforts to increase the likelihood of my arrest on fabricated charges. Consequently, this is a malicious BERT, and the acronym stands for British Institutional Racism Cover-Up Technique.
You and your nigger come out right now with your hands over your head, and I mean right now.
In Britain, the Personal Independence Payment serves as a welfare benefit to assist working-age adults in covering the additional costs associated with living with a health condition or disability. The Personal Independence Payment comprises 2 components, assistance for daily living needs and assistance for mobility needs. The British government claims it is non-means tested, non-contributory, and tax-free. They claim it is available to people in or out of work regardless of work capacity. My application for Personal Independence Payment was a 44-page questionnaire, and I supplied an additional 15 pages of dental and medical evidence. My application was then followed by a so-called assessment, which was merely a telephone conversation with one of their employees. Consequently, they failed to physically examine my dental and medical injuries prior to rejection of my claim. The first paragraph of their rejection letter stated,
I have looked at your claim and decided I cannot award you personal independence payment.
Meaning that I will receive no financial support. Therefore, this is a BERCT. The Department for Work and Pensions administers universal credit, a British social security payment. Theoretically, an award of universal credit consists of various elements that become payable to the claimant upon the application of relevant criteria. For instance, if a claimant has an illness or disability, then a limited capability for work payment applies following an assessment. Consequently, I applied for their work capability assessment. Again, my application was followed by a so-called assessment, which was merely a telephone conversation with one of their employees. Again, they failed to physically examine my dental and medical injuries prior to rejection of my claim. The first paragraph of their rejection letter stated,
Following your work capability assessment, we have decided that you do not have limited capability for work.
Consequently, I do not receive universal credit payments associated with the so-called limited capability for work element. Importantly, the rejection also means they will withhold or deduct a penalty from the minimum allowance of £393 per month if I remain unable to find work. I recently spoke with a staff member, who informed me that they have placed me on an intensive work search program due to the rejection of my application. Therefore, from their perspective, none of the symptoms we previously explored are present, so they expect me to work like any other healthy individual. Therefore, this is a BERCT. The Ministry of Justice funds the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, a British government agency, on behalf of taxpayers. Like other agencies, the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority did not conduct a physical examination of my dental and medical injuries prior to rejecting my compensation application. The first paragraph of their rejection letter reads as follows.
I have looked carefully at all the evidence available to me and I am sorry to tell you I cannot make an offer of compensation. I am unable to extend the time limit for receiving your application under paragraph 89 of that scheme.
According to their letter, paragraphs 22, 87, and 4 of their scheme also contributed to the rejection of my application. Paragraph 22 of their scheme states,
An award under this scheme will be withheld unless the incident giving rise to the criminal injury has been reported to the police as soon as reasonably practicable. In deciding whether this requirement is met, particular account will be taken of A, the age and capacity of the applicant at the date of the incident, and B, whether the effect of the incident on the applicant was such that it could not reasonably have been reported earlier.
This paragraph establishes the so-called police control, by extension state control, over compensation awards or lack thereof. Therefore, this is a malicious BERCT, which stands for British Institutional Racism Cover-Up Technique. Given my eligibility for all these applications, it's not a coincidence that they were all futile endeavors. By the way, did you notice any similarities between these responses from British authorities and those highlighted in the aptly titled book Delay Deny Defend by J. Feynman?
The name of the game is keep up, not catch up, nigger.
Congratulations. You've gained secret knowledge to safely handle food and drinks in any British workplace. This advisory is here to help if you're being stalked by someone pretending to be pleasant, like a self-appointed teen coffee maker. Or worse, if you spot a two-faced pedophile loitering around your office desk or kitchenette with something dangerous, like a pocket-sized bottle of poison. Now you know what to do, your life may depend on it. At least until British authorities begin to practice what they preach and deliver justice for all poisoning victims regardless of their ethnicity or skin color. If in doubt, refer to Baroness Casey's report, an independent review into the standards of behavior and internal culture of the Metropolitan Police Service. Page 332 contains corroborative and insightful findings. Please consider donating via the website www.donorbox.org/endhatepa. Alternatively, scan the following QR code. Your gift will support our efforts to stop this covered, heinous crime and help cover my ongoing, costly treatments. Unfortunately, my injuries have also led to intermittent and long-term unemployment, making your donation crucial for my healing and the restoration of my quality of life. Thank you for your kindness and generosity. This episode was produced by a poisoning survivor facilitated by family relatives with special thanks to a whistleblower. Stay tuned for my next video covering the minor signs and symptoms of repeated poisoned coffee ingestion. If I'm still here, we may also explore some healthy diets which help me. This video is likely to be removed by the lawless mafia, so save a copy immediately, hit the like button, subscribe and share. We've reached the conclusion of this episode, dear audience.
Injustice and racism thrive where good people do nothing, so let us stand, speak, and act until equality is not just an ideal, but a reality.
Who happens to know they poisoned people and lied about it.